Hi everyone, I'm Jane, and today we're going to bring a little zen into our day with this peaceful cherry blossom scene. This is a super simple and quick painting that was just what I needed after a long, stressful week. And I hope you enjoy it too. The materials list is coming up, but you can also find it in the video description below, along with affiliate links to each of the products, just in case you're missing anything needed for this painting. Now hit that subscribe button so that you can paint with me every week, and let's get started. Today, as usual, I'm starting with a brand new 12 by 16 inch Frederick's Red Label canvas. This is fresh out of the package. I have not added any gesso or anything else to it. Now for my background, I'm going to be using Payne's Gray and Titanium White, but if you don't have Payne's Gray, you can use Mars Black, or you could mix Burnt Umber with Ultramarine Blue to get a Payne's Gray, whatever you prefer. I just really like the softness of Payne's Gray compared to Mars Black. I'm going to start with my 1-inch flat brush, wet it in my jar, and wipe it off on the edge. Now for the sky, I want a color that is almost pure white, but just slightly on the gray side. So I'm going to come into my Payne's Gray and just drag out a little tiny bit. This is a pretty soft color. It's not hard like Mars Black. If you're using Mars Black, you're going to have to be even more careful about how much you use. So I don't know if you can tell there, but that color is just barely gray. It's almost pure white. Get quite a bit of that. I'm going to start laying it in here. See, you almost can't tell the difference. If your color goes too dark here, then everything else is going to have to be darker to make up for it, and you're going to kind of lose that atmospheric perspective. I am going to take this color down about a third of the way, just to make sure that I take it down far enough so that my mountains will fit. Just make sure that's all filled in. All right, now we can start on our first set of mountains. Okay, for our first set of mountains, I'm going to come down from the top by about 4 or 5 inches. So I want a color that is just ever so slightly darker than that sky color. See, with that one, I can tell a little bit better that it is a gray color. And that might still look really, really pale, but check it against your sky before you decide if you need to make it darker. So I'm just going to use the tip of my brush. I'm not going to use it flat like that. Use the tip and just kind of start sketching in a mountain shape. See that color? It's a little bit darker, and that is about perfect. I'm just going to smooth out that line. Since the gray-white color that I put on the sky at first is still wet, it's kind of helping blend down into this so that the bottom of the mountain is a little bit lighter than the top. But if your paint is drying faster than that, don't worry about it. I'm sure that later on my paint will dry a little quicker and I'll have to make up for that too. For now, I'm just taking advantage of the fact that that white is still pretty wet and blending. So down here at the bottom where I've got a line, I'm going to grab a little bit of white and just kind of blend that out. It's just going to help me, you know, like I said before, kind of maintain that atmospheric perspective at the base of each mountain so that the base of each mountain is a little bit lighter than the top. Let's go a little bit darker. So I got a little more Payne's Gray, a little more white. One thing I like to do is leave a little bit of the previous color mixed on my palette. So right here where my pinky is, that's this previous color that I used. So I can tell just by mixing next to it that that color is darker. So I think that's good. I'm going to bring at least one of the peaks up above, just because I think that's a little more interesting than just keeping them all stacked and not letting one cross over the next. Okay, did my line and then light pressure to dust it into that paint that is still wet. See that? There we go. And the texture on this canvas, because it's a little bit toothy, I feel like that helps me get a really nice blend. Really, really smooth. And I feel like the bottom of that is still blended pretty good. Let's just go ahead and go a little darker. So again, this color right here is the color I just used there. So I'm gonna make sure I can still see some of that so I can compare. There, that color's a little bit darker, but it's not, you know, too much different. Up above there, just a little bit. Oh, that was weird. And then smooth that together. So there, see, my paint is starting to dry out. So it's not really smoothing there quite as much as it did in other places. So if you start running into that, see how I'm getting my texture, not really a smooth blend. I'm just gonna dip the very, very end of my brush into my water, just get a tiny bit of extra water and pick up a little bit more white, light pressure, and just smooth that out. So see if it's really hot, or if you're just a little bit slower, or you have to take a break and you're not able to get that blend from one section to the next, just pick up some white. You can do that. Light pressure. See that my brush isn't even bending. Can you see that? A little bit more. Let's just lighten it up right in here. Still, brush is not bending. And our next set, try to keep some really interesting shapes to your mountains. You know, don't make all of your mountains, you know, don't do that. That's not very interesting. Just be really almost kind of sporadic with them. Let them cross over each other sometimes. Maybe this one doesn't go as high as the other ones. Maybe it'll just drop down like that and disappear. It's really only tall on this one side. Just like in real life, make all of your mountains a little bit different. Light pressure to dust it into that previous color that is still wet. And that helps get rid of brush marks. Let's get a little bit more white and blend out that bottom line. And darker still. So you can kind of see on my plate this graduation of the colors, just like in the mountains. Just pulling some Payne's Gray out right now to see how much the white on my brush is affecting it. I might pull just a little bit of extra white in there. There we go. And dust it out. The fun thing about painting mountains like this is that atmospheric perspective, you know. I mean, you could do this a little bit more graphically if you like, and just have the mountains be a solid color. I really like kind of playing with that and letting them be lighter at the bottom. You know, almost like there's a little bit of a haze or fog or something sitting at the base of each mountain. Tiny speck of white, dust out the bottom of that line. Oh, I had a little extra water on my brush that time. That's all right. We are almost down to the bottom. Now I think I do have quite a bit of that lighter color. Payne's Gray is very soft, so I'm just going to go into Payne's Gray and see what happens. I think that's going to be fine. Light pressure, always light pressure to blend, you guys. I have a lot of paint on my brush, and I suspect that most people who have a hard time with blending, I think that it's probably mostly a pressure thing. You know, you've got a lot of paint on your brush and you're putting full pressure, so instead of blending, you're just depositing more of that paint. So be really aware of the pressure that you put on your brush. I just picked up Payne's Gray there, and I know that is dramatically different than the last color I used. However, with all the white that's on my brush and this paint is still wet, this is not going to be solid Payne's Gray and dark. I'm going to bring that up here a bit. See how much lighter that is already. So let me demonstrate what happens, what I mean by, you know, controlling the pressure to blend. So see, my light pressure there is blending, but if I put heavy pressure, look at all that paint I just deposited, which is fine here because that's what I wanted to do. Heavier pressure there. Light pressure to blend. And as you get more practiced at it, you'll start to do something that I do a lot is, you know, I'll be going back and forth like that, just the tip of my brush. And when I decide I need more paint, I'll just do one quick swipe with heavy pressure back up onto the tippy toe of my brush. And it's just something that I automatically do, but it comes with practice. And I think that, you know, as long as you're aware of your pressure and you're making it a point to pay attention to it, that will come to you. I'm just going to grab a bit of white and I'm going to blend out this bottom line here on the edge of my brush. See that? Kind of make that seem a little flat. Maybe it's water, maybe it's haze, maybe it's ground. It can be interpreted however you like. All right, now I cleaned off my brush. This is all still wet again. I do want to do one more set of mountains, but I want them to be as dark as possible. But like I said, because this is all still wet, it won't be solid Payne's Gray. It'll be pretty close though. We'll get quite dark here. If you're using Mars Black, you'll probably end up with black because that's just how strong Mars Black is. That is still pretty wet. I might let this dry for a couple of minutes and then come back and finish that. I just want it a little bit darker than that. Okay, I think that's dry enough. So I'm going to get some more Payne's Gray, just Payne's Gray, and fill that in. I know that's solid dark, but I'm only going to leave it dark like that right at the top. Let's pick up a little bit of white. Maybe a little extra water on my brush. Start just below it. And right up into it. Oops. Guess for a minute there, I thought I was using Mars Black. So I painted it all out with my white. Soft pressure. Blend that together. Almost no pressure. There. And maybe I'll just do one more. Do as many as you need to fill up as much of the canvas as you like. You know, depending on the size and shape of your canvas, or even how dark you make your colors, how high up everything starts, you might do more or less mountains than I did. I think that's about good. I think I'm just going to do a tiny little piece over here and I'm done. I'm kind of letting this one smooth into the background there. We'll just see what that looks like, see what happens there. Okay, so there's our mountain scene. Pretty simple, but we've created some nice atmospheric perspective. So for those of you who are not familiar with the term atmospheric perspective, what that does is it basically says that the farther something is in the distance, the more atmosphere there is between you and that object. And the atmosphere, while we can see through it, over a distance, it does start to obscure things, change the color, lighten them a little bit. And if we were painting this in color, everything in the distance would get a little bit more blue. So here, since we're just painting in black and white, it's just getting lighter. And now we are ready to paint our cherry blossoms. So for our cherry blossoms, I'm going to start with the branch. Kind of look at it and plan out how you want your branch to fall. If you need to sketch it out on a piece of paper first, then go ahead and do that. The reason I suggest that is you don't want to take your branch, you know, from here and just kind of shoot it right to here. And then you've got this little tiny branch with this whole scene that's just kind of, it really is just kind of empty. You want this scene to form the backdrop for the cherry blossom. The other consideration that I have is I don't want my cherry blossom to, you know, come from here and just and cover this entire canvas. I want it to be large enough that it's obviously what we're looking at, but not so large that it makes painting the background pointless. So I've kind of decided that I want my cherry blossom branch to kind of move down in this type of a direction to probably right about here, and then kind of come out this way. So it'll be empty toward the bottom and probably a little bit over here. And to start drawing my branch, I'm going to use my number 10 round brush. As always, I'm going to wet it in my jar and just wipe a little bit off. If you want to sketch it onto your canvas with the chalk first, you can go ahead and do that too. I'm much more comfortable doing tree branches just right to it with paint than I am with sketching them, so I'm not going to. I'm just going to load up with some Payne's Gray, make sure my brush is rolled to a nice point. And I'm not going to worry about the width first, I'm just going to worry about getting the general shape on first. So I'm going to have it come from about here. I've got my pinky on my canvas so I don't put too much pressure on it because I just want to kind of sketch it first. Letting my hand wobble a bit, and I'll bring it down to about there. I'll probably have another branch that comes off here somewhere. Right about like that. Okay, now I'm going to start filling it in. So I'm going to pick up a little bit more paint. Maybe I'll even come in and just grab a little tiny slash of white, because Payne's Gray is quite transparent. So the white will help with that transparency, but it'll also kind of start getting some highlights going. So right here, I'm going to put a good amount of pressure. Really get a nice wide branch there. I'm kind of turning my brush and letting it wiggle as I go. Can you see how I'm kind of rolling my brush a little bit? What that does is that helps ensure that I get a nice jagged branch, because I don't want my branch to be too smooth and, you know, fake looking. I like to have these little jagged bends in it. I'm not terribly worried about the little canvas holes that are showing up just yet, because I'm going to add some highlights and stuff on this. Right now I'm just working on the shape. I think that's good. Let's widen it out here, and I like a little bit of an elbow there. Love elbows in branches. Let's put another one right there. There we go. let's do pretty much the same thing on the other branch. Except I don't think I'm going to go quite as wide on this branch. This is kind of a secondary branch. Little elbow there. All right, I like that. Just picked up a little bit more white, kind of coming in and playing with the shape of the branch, as well as just adding in a few areas where there's going to be some highlight. Maybe right there. Don't worry about where your light source is. Highlight it wherever you feel like you want it highlighted. You know, this is kind of a misty day, so we don't really know where the light source is coming from. It's coming from wherever you want it to be coming from. But also, let's not worry about realism, okay? I think that so many people are way hung up on realism, and I don't understand that. You know, the goal of art is not to render something perfectly as it would be in the real world. The goal of art is to, you know, express yourself and to create something that you want to see. You know, we can go out into the real world and see things exactly the way they are. That's what the real world is for. Art is to see things the way you want to see them. So there's no reason that you have to stick to, you know, only the way they would look in the real world. You know, I get questions on my videos all the time about, well, why did you do that? Why, that's not what that would look like in real life. Well, it's a good thing because this isn't real life. So I don't really care what it looks like in real life. I made it the way I wanted to see it in my painting, and you can do the same thing. That is the whole point of art. So don't question why somebody does something particular in art. Just appreciate that, you know, that it's expression and that it's different, and, you know, art can make you think about the real world, and it can make you think about the real world in different ways. And I think that's what it's for. I'm just gonna pop a little brighter right up here. I'm not gonna get too crazy in this area with highlights. I do wanna put a little bit, but most of my flowers are gonna be in here. So if I spend a lot of time highlighting there, then, you know, I might just be wasting my time because you probably won't see a lot of it. I will definitely put a little bit because some of it's gonna show. You could add some brown into your highlights if you wanted. When I was working on this painting over the week, I did a couple of times put some brown into the highlights, but ultimately I felt like it kind of took away from the flowers. And I wanted the flowers to really pop, to really stand out. And so I feel like the best way to do that is just to make sure everything else is very just solid, just black and white. And I think that's good. Okay, let's add just a few little detail branches. We can always add more later. I'm gonna go to my number 5 round brush, and I'm gonna load up with my Payne's Gray. Keep my brush rolled to a nice point, and I am gonna get just a little poke of white. And I'm just gonna decide on a place where I know I'm gonna want to see at least a little bit of flowers. And I'm gonna start right on my branch. Same type of thing, kind of twirling my brush and letting it wiggle. Just get the shape on first. And now we can come back and worry about, you know, the width and the elbows and filling in all of the little holes. Adding a little bit of white for a bit of a highlight. Maybe just a couple little bits off of that. Nothing too crazy. I'm just gonna do a couple of them here and there, and then I'm gonna let this dry because I don't wanna pick up any of this dark color. I wanna make sure that my flowers stay nice and bright. If it's easier for you to do little branches like this with a long liner, that's perfectly okay too. Whatever you feel the most comfortable with. I think I'm just gonna do one more little bit right over here, and then we'll be ready. All right, there is our painting so far. So you can kind of see how all of the elements work together, the shape of the branch in relation to the size of the canvas. And now I'm gonna let this dry, like I said, so I don't pick up any of that Payne's gray, and then we'll be back to do our flowers. Okay, we are ready to start putting our cherry blossoms on. And to do so, I'm gonna use my 1/2" filbert. I'm gonna wet it in my jar and wipe it on the edge. Now I know that some of you have a hard time kind of being a little bit loose, are gonna work really tight in here. So I'm gonna do a couple demonstrations. I have some quinacridone, and I'm gonna load up with that. This is what I don't want you to do on your canvas. I don't want you to come into your branch and be really tight right on the branch, just like that. No, we wanna get off of our branch, okay? The other thing I don't want you to do with this color is to make a flower. Don't come in here and make this perfect, you know, petal, petal. I don't want any of that, okay? What I want you to do, because this is just your underpainting for the flowers, so I want you to get a good amount of paint. I want you to remember that the bigger flowers are gonna be toward the bigger part of the branch. As we get toward the end of the branches, the flowers will get smaller. So I'm just gonna start right here on this bit of branch, and I'm just gonna kind of dash it in here. Get it off of the branch. Okay, that's the beginning of my flower. Now I'm gonna come into my white, and I got a pretty good blob. Do you see that? I'm gonna use the edge of my brush while this is still wet. I wanna work quickly, so that's still wet. I'm gonna come in here, and I'm just gonna kind of start tapping in these little shapes. It's basically like that, like that, like that, and all different kinds of directions. Do not try to draw perfect flowers here and get them right up against each other. They can overlap. Some of them might have, you know, a fully defined set of petals. Some of them might not. And it's gonna look really weird at first, and you're gonna have a hard time looking at that saying, that looks like a flower. But as we start going and you start really filling in, you're gonna start seeing it. See how working on that quinacridone while it's still wet, and I didn't clean off my brush, it's really dragging it in, but also having the quinacridone in the background, I don't have to worry so much about trying to make my flowers look full. I'm using a heavy amount of paint, so some of these flowers have some texture to them, and that's perfect. See, just a little dot, dot, dot. Let your brain do the work and say, oh, I see some flowers there. Don't make your hand do the work and try to make flowers. See, that looks like some little cherry blossom flowers. A little bit more white, and maybe we can even pull some little directional bits out like that. And before anybody comments and says, cherry blossoms don't have that, I don't really care. This is a painting. This is art. I'm not worried about trying to make, You know, perfect cherry blossoms that actually look exactly like cherry blossoms in the real world. If I wanted cherry blossoms in the real world, I'd go take a picture of them. All right, more quinacridone. I'm gonna zoom you out a little bit there so you can kind of see how these all play together. And I'm gonna put in another bit right there. Again, did not clean off my brush, maybe not that much white, but a good amount on the end, using the edge of my brush and just generally dash in some shapes of petals. Remember that these flowers, they're not all going to be facing you so you can see every petal. Some are facing away, some are facing up, some are kind of, you know, in between directions. Some may have lost petals. Some are probably being covered up by other flowers. Don't try to make everything look like an actual flower. I think you'll be much happier if you just do it kind of generally. Let's put a couple of those little directional bits in here, because I like the movement of those. And let's keep going out toward the edge. So some more quinacridone. Notice I'm not taking out onto these little branches, at least not with this big brush. I am putting a little less pressure on the edge of my brush here while making the petals, because I feel like my flowers would be a little bit smaller here, where the branch is starting to get a little smaller. Let's do one more bit here in this area, and then I think we can move on to a smaller brush. Good amount of quinacridone there. See, I'm not even trying to make flower shapes, just dashing it on to remind myself of where I want these flowers to sit. But this should be a pretty simple painting. I don't want you to get intimidated. The only thing that I think is really challenging for a lot of people in this painting is being just a little bit random with the flowers. I know that especially when we're new to painting, it's so hard to be random. We have this conversation all the time in live events and the events that I do with my Patreon and YouTube members. You know, so many people have a hard time being random. And so if you find that you're one of those, just know that you are in good company. And I used to have a super hard time being random too. But the more you work at it, just like anything else, I promise, it's a skill that you can pick up. And occasionally, I still struggle with it. All right, let's start working on some smaller branches. Now for this, I am going to go to my number 8 Bright. And the Bright, because I think that I like the way the Bright does the little flowers better than the little filbert. But whatever you prefer. I'm going to do it the same way. I picked up quinacridone, and I'm just going to kind of scatter it here where I know I'm going to want some little flowers. Go into my white, and just like with the filbert, I'm going to use the corner. Just zoom you in there a little bit more. And same thing, just little bits of these shapes. See how quickly I'm working? It's not out of practice. It's in order to not overthink my shapes. I just decide I need a flower here, dash a couple of petals on, however I feel comfortable. I'm not trying to give any of them a certain number of petals. Some might only get 2. Some might get 3 or 4, even 5. Whatever I feel like it needs, just in that one little spot. And I kind of like these little bits poking out here, so I might leave those, but maybe I'll just kind of draw your attention to them a bit by putting a couple of those little directional petals there. I really feel like I'm almost done. I'm not gonna, you know, pack these branches full of flowers. Oh, I picked up some gray there. I don't want any gray in my flowers. We're gonna do one more thing to our cherry blossoms and then we're actually done. This is a pretty quick painting. Pretty simple, pretty quick. And I think just a little bit right in here. I really like these kind of open ends on these branches down here at the bottom. If you feel like there's a kind of a weirdness where your different sets of flowers are overlapping, you know, the flowers you made with the larger brush versus the flowers you made with the smaller brush, don't be afraid to take, you know, like that smaller brush, get it in there so you've got some of those smaller shapes. And you can even come back like through here and just make a couple of those smaller shapes. Whatever you need to do, just don't have, you know, like a ball where you've got obviously large flowers and then a completely disconnected ball of obviously smaller flowers. Okay, I'm going to go back to my number 5 round and we're going to add some little centers into some of these flowers. I don't want you to get crazy and add it to every flower. For the centers, I'm going to use my leftover Payne's Gray. So I'm going to grab that and I'm going to bring it over here and mix it in with my quinacridone. I want this to be very, very dark, but I want to be able to tell, kind of, that it's quinacridone. See, about like that. And do you see how much paint I picked up there? A good amount. So wherever you feel like there's a center, or wherever you want to say there's a center, just come in and put a little dot. And you can even break it up with some little smaller dots. Whatever you like. But like I said, don't go overboard and put dots everywhere, because then they'll kind of lose their impact. That's really all I'm going to do. I'm going to zoom you out so you can kind of see how this works overall, because I know that looking at it zoomed in close, it kind of loses its impact and they just look like little dark blobs. But zoomed out, they add just a little bit more depth to the flowers overall, particularly if it's a really light area, then that little bit of dark really makes an impact. And that white is still a little wet. So I am picking up a little bit of it and it's smearing in with this dark center color, and that's okay. Now, I know that because this is dark, it might be kind of scary, but I want you to remember that if you get it too dark, you know, if you put it on there and you're like, oh, I don't like that, it's way too dark, just wait for it to dry and then put another white petal over top of it. It's not a big deal. So if it's too dark, don't try to correct it now, because all you're going to do is smear it together with the rest of the wet paint. So just leave it. So let's say right here, I go like that and I think, oh, that's so dark, I don't like that. Or I get it outside there and I don't like that. Actually, I do kind of like that. I think maybe I'll put just a few here and there outside. See, you never know what you're gonna like. You might do something that you think of as a mistake, stand back and look at it and think, oh, I kind of like that. And I do kind of like that. But if you didn't, you just let that dry completely, come back and put a little white petal over it later. this set of flowers just feels so light to me and kind of out of place. So I'm really going to bump up some of the dark bits in here. You know, I think I've changed my mind about the bottom here. So I'm going to go back to my filbert and my Payne's Gray, and I'm going to make sure that this is very solid and it doesn't blend in with the background. I'm going to make it the ground. This is where we're standing, and this cherry blossom is kind of coming out over the top of our head, hanging down in front of us. And I'm just going to fill this all in. And then I'm going to let it dry. Well, when I say let it dry, I probably use my blow dryer most of the time. You just want to make sure it's dry for the next part. All right, back to my filbert, little quinacridone. And you could highlight all of this if you like. I'm not going to because, again, it's not the focus. I just want to kind of say that we're standing on it. And so one of the ways I'm going to say that is just by adding a few little bits of flowers. But also another reason I'm not highlighting this is because I wanted to keep this a pretty simple painting. Whenever we do rock highlighting, you know, sometimes people can get kind of intimidated by that and just feel like that's a bit more difficult than what they can do. But I've shown you guys how to do highlighting on rocks, lots and lots. So feel free to do that if that's what you want to do. I'm just going to add in a few little flower bits here and there. Try not to keep them totally clustered together like I started to do there. Just kind of pull a few out there. And I don't think they need the dark little centers since what they're sitting on is so dark anyway. I don't feel like the centers would really do anything for the flowers. So I'm just going to leave them off. And I think I'm going to sign. And there's your cherry blossom zen. I hope you enjoyed painting this one with me, and I hope that painting it was just as relaxing for you as it was for me. If you'd like to share your version of this painting with me, come check out my new forum on my website. Just go to paintingwithjane.com/forum and you can sign up for free. Thank you to my Patreon supporters and YouTube members whose contributions make it possible for me to continue to bring you free videos every week. And thank you for always painting with me. I'll see you next time.